So clearly I accidentally filmed a sad beige aesthetic video and I don't like it, but I'm not gonna refilm it because we're talking about authenticity. So in the name of authenticity, it is what it is. So where we left off last time was at this point of authenticity.
And so a large segment of communications research about identity and social media is about authenticity. And what does it mean to be authentic on social media?
And it's very hard to talk about authenticity, but we're obsessed with it societally. Because of course, being authentic requires kind of an understanding of our identity as something where at the core there is someone that I always am. But if we think back to Goffman and how identity is always a performance, then it's very hard to assess what does it mean to be authentic, because naturally we will always pull out a different part of our identity in different situations. So when we are online, this is very clear and very easy to do in a way. But one way we can talk about authenticity is how are we perceived as authentic. So it's not about assessing some core authenticity, but more about how others around me, or in terms of social media, your followers or your connections perceive you as your authentic self. Generally speaking, it's easier to talk about these things when we don't try to assess what does it mean to be authentic, but we are trying to look at the opposite when we're looking at instances where people violate this. So when people come off as inauthentic, and especially if we think of like influencers or kind of social media personalities, I think there's a lot of good examples here. If you're like me and you've been on the internet like chronically in the past decade and you've been following like influencers and their journeys, I find it very interesting when we look at how followers, or us, I guess, consumers of media, handle change on social media. So if we take the example of like a YouTuber that started out pretty young, like Emma Chamberlain, but pretty much anyone who has been a teenager when they started like YouTube or like influencing, and how it's so clear that we are, as their audiences, are so resistant to change. Even though I think we can all agree that from when you're 14 to when you're 24, in those 10 years, you will change a lot, and especially those 10 years, right? You grow up, you have new experiences, so naturally you will behave differently, you will change your opinions, you will change your style. But as an influencer, it's very hard to do that because your audience requires this consistency from you that we kind of then perceive as being authentic. So then your audience kind of demands you to stay the same even though you're changing. And I find it very interesting because if you're someone who's not on the internet, like you're not an influencer or like a micro celebrity, you're allowed to change. Actually, even required from me by society to change. I should be able to grow up and change my mind. And it's very visible that there are so many YouTubers who then have to make a video about how they changed and kind of explain themselves to their audiences because they cannot keep that consistency, that authenticity, simply because they grew up. And of course, there are different levels to it. I think a lot of the times these very big influencers, of course, their lifestyle completely changes because maybe they move like a social class because of the kind of money they make. And that of course can also come across as extremely inauthentic. You know, when you start to follow someone because they're like the girl next door, and then they start to, I don't know, only buy like very expensive clothes or skincare or whatnot, and they're not relatable anymore. That's very difficult as an audience. But it's actually really difficult, I think, as an influencer because you build an audience based on that persona, and then you have to sort of anticipate how your audience will grow with you. And when it comes to, for example, these kind of things like brand deals or like money, it's quite likely that the majority of your audience will not grow with you that way financially. So it can be, I think, quite challenging to navigate. There's a book review I read in the New Yorker, and it really stuck with me because it talks about our right to forget in social media and this kind of right to change. In the very early stages of social media, in the 2000s, like with Facebook and whatnot, we really posted whatever we wanted. I think there's a lot of memes around this, which I really enjoy because I completely recognize myself in that. Because I completely recognize myself in that. Of course, some of it is just funny and cringe, but sometimes you want to actually kind of disconnect from your past self like that. Like there are connections or images or comments or whatnot that you made online that you don't want anymore. It doesn't represent your identity right now. And I think when you hear in the news that people got fired for commenting something years ago, it makes me really wonder, what does it mean? What is our right to forget or to be forgotten on social media? And if you go through a very big transition in your life, for example, as a trans person, how does that kind of consistency in your social media and your identity is kind of required both by platforms and also societally, whereas you are really just going through a very big change. But it can be very small things as well, right? There might be just images of me from my prom that I don't want people to see anymore. But of course, we as users and consumers of social media, we learn how to navigate this and we're really good at it. Not only we know how to navigate it through the platforms, all the things that the platforms offer to us to manage our identities, we also become very creative with it, right? And we learn ways to use different social media platforms for different things, to have multiple profiles if necessary for multiple interests, to curate our feeds, our images, and our identities online so it kind of matches with what we want to represent at a point in time. And then you can go back and delete it. Of course, there are traces of you online that you might not have control over, and it can be very problematic if you I don't know, became a meme or you were bullied. But I do think that in a way social media works for us, but in some ways it works against us. And in terms of platforms, these platforms should make it easier for us to navigate this. But there is also kind of a control that these platforms don't have, and that is the kind of norms and rules and unspoken rules that we create around platforms. So for example, if we don't allow each other to change or to make mistakes or to change our minds, then no matter what the platform does or what kind of options it offers us to change or to curate our profiles, if we as society and internet culture don't let people do that. So social media platforms have this kind of responsibility when it comes to our identity management. They are responsible to create platforms, online spaces, and promote internet cultures that make it easy for us to use these platforms to manage our identities in a way that it matches with our growth, and that it doesn't violate us. But at the same time, we as a society also have an immense role in this because we create these internet cultures, and there is, I believe, a limit in how much the platform can control the culture that we build around it. So we can use social media to represent ourselves and to connect and to kind of lean into the joyful things around it, and we can also use it to lean into the harmful things around it. I think that there is so much we think of social media as bad, and there is actually so much more agency and so much more that we can do as people, I can do as a person, but also that we can do as a society to make social media a fun experience for us. Thank you so much for watching this video. And I'm looking forward to any kind of discussion that we can have in the comments or on Instagram. If you have any suggestions of topics that you would like me to cover, you're welcome to let me know. I do have a few ideas, so I hope you like and subscribe and all that stuff, and you'll come back for the next video I'll make. Bye!